Hello, my name is Erin Blanchard, and I would like to welcome you to the supplemental video session for my physical leaf collection of flora sample of the Ottawa Valley. So the main objective of this video session is to give you some leaf characteristics and features that will help you identify those leaves when you're out in the field. So it's supplementing the physical collection. We're going to go through 23 different tree species, and we're going to go through 30 different shrub species. And I just want you to bear with me as we go through this, just because I have all the leaf samples here in plastic sleeves, and it may take me a little while to get them out when we're going through them. So that being said, let's get started. We're going to start with the trees, and we'll start with the willow family. And the first leaf that we look at in the willow family is the balsam poplar leaf. So this is a balsam poplar leaf right here, and there's a few things to note about the balsam poplar leaf. There's the back of it. The first thing is that it's egg-shaped, and the second thing that you can see is that there are rounded teeth along the edges. The third thing that I find really interesting about the balsam poplar leaf, and something that helps me identify it, is that the back is actually quite smooth, and it's got tiny, tiny, tiny white downy hairs that you can't even see on the video camera here. So that's the balsam poplar tree. The second tree that is in the Ottawa Valley from the willow family is the large tooth aspen. And here's a sample of that tree leaf. And I'm actually going to pull out also the trembling aspen, which is also in the willow family, and the eastern cottonwood, which is also in the willow family. The eastern cottonwood is a non-native tree to the Ottawa Valley area, but it is quite predominant here. So the reason I wanted to pull all three of these out together is because there are a few similarities between them, and there are also some differences. So on this side here, we have the large tooth aspen, named from its large teeth, as you can see. We have the trembling aspen, very round shaped, and it's kind of a small version of the large tooth aspen. And then thirdly we have the eastern cottonwood, which you may think looks similar to the other two. However, it's quite triangular shaped or deltoid shaped, which makes it different from the other two, which are quite round. The reason I pulled all three of these out together is because all three of them have a very flat stalk, as you can see. This is a good example because it's not in the plastic. But here's another one. You can't even see the stalk, it's so flat. You just see the plastic. So all three of these have flat stalks. And the reason for that is because when they're in the wind picks them up, the flat stalk, and blows them. And that's why you get the name trembling aspen, because they look like they're trembling in the wind. And all three of these leaves have that same characteristic. So just bear with me, we're done the willow family. We're going to move on. I'm just going to put these samples back. Excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. So now we're going to move on to the walnut family, which is the second of 9 tree families that we've studied. So the first in that family is the bitternut hickory. And here's a sample of the bitternut hickory. I'm also going to show you a sample of the 2 other species in the walnut family, and then we can discuss how they're different, because that's the biggest way to distinguish them. This is a large sample. This is a butternut. This is the second tree in the walnut family, and it's non-native to the area. And finally, this is also a large sample, we have the black walnut, and this is also non-native to the area. So, how we can differentiate these? You can see that the bitternut hickory does look quite different from these. The bitternut hickory can contain 7 to 11 leaflets, so not as many as the other 2 samples that I have here. And the biggest characteristic to remember about the bitternut hickory is that the top leaf is always the largest. So the leaves start small and they grow bigger. Alright, let's put that back. Now, the butternut hickory has 11 to 17 leaflets and looks very much like the black walnut. The difference being the black walnut has 14 to 23 leaflets, so it often has more. If you can't tell the difference that way, another way is by, again, the size of the leaves. So in a butternut, the leaves are biggest in the middle. Can you see that? Small at the bottom, a little smaller at the top, but the biggest leaves we're finding right here in the middle of the sample. Whereas on the black walnut, the smallest leaves are found at the top instead of the bottom. And sometimes, as in this sample, the top leaf is missing. So you just have the two that are a pair at the top and you're missing the actual end leaf. So that's the difference there. Biggest leaves in the middle, small leaves at the top. And again, with the bitternut hickory, the first one we looked at, biggest leaves at the top. So that's the walnut family for us. Now we're going to move on to the birch family. And we're going to start with the white birch, also known as the paper birch. So a lot of you probably know, this leaf, excuse me, a lot of you probably know this leaf because of its bark. So if you look at its bark, it's white, creamy, papery, and it peels off really easily. You can actually damage the tree if you peel the bark off all the way around. So how do we look at a leaf and know that it's a white birch? Well, one thing is that it's going to be egg-shaped, as you can see in this sample here. A second thing is that it's going to have double serrations. So it's going to have two different sets of teeth that are going to be irregular along the margin of the leaf. That's pretty much the white birch for you. The next two species from the birch family in the Ottawa Valley look very similar and can be hard to tell apart. I still have trouble telling them apart. So we're going to go through those and see how we can distinguish between them. I got one. Whoop, and it fell. And I got two. Okay, so on this side, in my left hand, your right side, I think, we have a yellow birch. And in this hand, we have an ironwood. They look pretty similar to me. Do they look similar to you? Yeah, I thought so. So, it's pretty hard to tell these apart if you're not looking at the tree. If you're looking at the tree, this yellow birch leaf, its trunk is going to have the same kind of papery, peel-off bark that the white birch does, but it's going to be darker in color, almost golden brown, bronzy colored. Whereas this ironwood is going to have a brown trunk that is very flaky, so pieces will flake off very easily, and usually the trunk is quite skinny. So if we're just looking at the leaves, how do we tell them apart? They both have serrated margins, they both have acuminate apexes, so how do we tell them apart? One way I like to do it is by looking at the back of the leaf and looking at the venation. So in the white birch, try to keep my hand steady, we can see that the venations are very distinct and they move out to a big tooth at every point along the margin of the leaf. There's a difference in the ironwood. If you can see in the ironwood, it has secondary venations coming off of the venations, so they're not completely direct. See here how it splits in two, and here how it splits in two, and again down here how it splits in two. The ironwood tends to do that a lot more than the yellow birch. So that's the birch family for you. Just pop these samples back. And now we're going to move on to the fourth tree family, which is the beech family. We're going to start with the American beech tree. A few things about this leaf make it very easy to identify. The first is the trunk of the tree. They look like humongous elephant legs. The tree is usually very big around, so it has a large diameter, and the bark is smooth and gray and just looks like that big elephant leg. It's very distinguishable. And you can usually find beech trees growing in pure stands together, so that's another way to identify them. In terms of the leaf, there's some things you probably notice. First, the margin has very distinct teeth along it. We call that a dentate margin. That's how I really like to identify it. The other way we can identify it is kind of the egg to obovate shape that it has. But usually I look at these dentate teeth because I've never come across another tree leaf that has the same type of teeth on it that are so distinct. So that's the beech tree, or American beech tree. Now we're going to look at 3 different types of oaks, so I'm going to pull them all out together again and we can compare them because I find that a really great way to do it, and I hope you do too. Okay, so we have our white oak. We have our bur oak. And we have our red oak. So, excuse me. How can we tell these apart? Well, let's start with shape. These 2 oak leaves, the bur oak and the red oak, tend to be spatulate shaped, which means that they have a very skinny base and it grows and gets wider at the apex and at the top of the leaf. So again, skinny, grows and gets wider. Whereas the white oak tree, on the other hand, has more of a oblong shape. It kind of just stays linear. It doesn't spread out as much at the top as the other 2 do. Another difference in the white oak is that it has very, very deep sinuses. It has large lobes and very deep sinuses or holes in the leaf. They go almost down to the stem. See how close that gets to the stem? Whereas in both the bur oak and the red oak, they don't get nearly as close to the stem, and they're not nearly as deep around the entirety of the leaf. So how do you tell the bur and the red oak apart? Well, you probably noticed that one is quite rounded, the bur oak, and the other is quite pointed or serrated, the red oak. It actually has, if you look closely, a tiny bristle coming off the top of each tooth. There's a good one you can see right there. Right there. I think that's pretty cool. So those are the 3 oaks for you, and that's the beech family. I'll pop them back and I'll be right back with you. Alright, so we're going to move on to the 5th family, and this is the elm family. And we only studied 1 tree in this family, but it's probably my favorite. It's my favorite leaf, probably my favorite tree too, and I'll let you know why. Excuse me again. So, this is a white elm leaf, which is from the white elm tree. And one of the reasons I really like the tree is because from far away, it looks like a piece of broccoli. I'm not kidding. Like if you look at the tree from, say you're standing on one side of a farmer's field and it's at the opposite side, it looks like a humongous piece of broccoli. So I think that's pretty cool. So how do we distinguish that this is a white elm leaf? Well, if we look closely, excuse me if I hurt your eyes, you can see that it's actually doubly serrated. So it has, you might not even be able to see that in this camera, it has 2 sets of teeth, these big teeth, which you can clearly see, and the tiny, tiny teeth off those big teeth. The other thing is that it is pinnately veined, so the veins come straight out to the teeth. And my favorite characteristic is that it has a sandpapery feel. You can even hear that. It sounds like a cat tongue. I love that. I think that's so cool. And there you are. There's the white elm. So now we're going to be looking at the next family, which is the rose family. We also only studying one type of tree in the rose family in the Ottawa Valley, And that is, if I can get down here, the black cherry. This looks like a lot of other leaves, doesn't it? It does. So how do you know it's a black cherry?